The silence before dawn on August 12, 2025, was a liar. Colonel Oleksandr Kovalenko felt it in his bones. A low, resonant hum that wasn't sound, but pressure. For 3 weeks he had lived on nothing but stale bread, bitter coffee, and the meticulous, unholy geometry of the trap he was about to spring. From his command bunker dug into the loamy soil west of Zaporizhia, the world was a collection of flickering green screens. Each pixel represented a life, his men, the enemy, the civilians caught between. "Status, Urina," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. A young woman, her face pale in the monitor's glow, tapped a key. "Sky is clear, Colonel. Thermal shows nothing but rabbits and field mice." Urina was his best drone operator. Her eyes saw farther than any general's. "They're waiting for sunrise. Classic doctrine. They think we follow the same book," Oleksandr murmured, tracing a line on a digital map. The line wasn't a trench or a wall. It was a ghost, a path of carefully disguised pits, mines, and kill zones stretching for 3 miles. His masterpiece of death. He hated it. He hated the necessity of it. 50 miles away, inside the cramped, diesel-scented belly of a T-90 tank nicknamed the Beast, Lieutenant Dmitry Volkov felt a different kind of pressure. The intoxicating fizz of impending victory. He was 22, a graduate of Moscow's finest military academy, and he believed in the righteousness of his cause with the uncomplicated fervor of the young. "Crew check," he barked into his helmet mic. "Gleb, ready on the main gun. Misha, driver, engine green. Sergei, loader, shell in the breech." "Good," Dmitri said, a grin touching his lips. He peered through the narrow vision slit. The Ukrainian fields were dark, peaceful. He imagined rolling through them, the glorious tricolor waving from his turret, liberating the cities before the world had even finished its morning coffee. Command had been clear. 180 drones would soften them, 120 tanks would break them, and 1,500 of Russia's finest VDV infantry would mop up. A swift, decisive blow. Shock and awe, the Americans used to call it. Today, it would have a Russian name. But the first move didn't come from the tanks. It began hours earlier with shadows. Small teams of 2 to 5 Spetsnaz operatives slithered across the border under the cloak of night. They were phantoms with a single purpose: to sever the nerves of the Ukrainian defense. Wires were cut, small charges placed on relay towers, and whispers of sabotage spread to unsettle the defenders before the first shell ever fell. They believed they were unseen. They were wrong. In Oleksandr's bunker, Urina's fingers danced across her console. "Colonel, I have them. Multiple small heat signatures moving between the tree lines, the infiltration teams." "Don't engage," Oleksandr ordered, his heart a cold, steady drum. "Let the wolves into the pen. Just tag and track, every single one." At 6:40 a.m., the sky broke. It came not as a thunderclap, but as a high-pitched, terrifying whine, like a million hornets descending at once. From 3 directions, the Russian drone swarm filled the air. For Dmitri, watching on a command feed, it was a beautiful, terrible sight, a testament to Russian power. For the people of Zaporizhia, Pokrovsk, and Novopavlivka, it was the apocalypse. The first wave was the eyes. Drones with high-resolution optics hovered, their lenses drinking in every detail, feeding a perfect real-time map of the battlefield back to Russian command. The second and third waves were the claws. Explosive-laden suicide drones, each programmed with a target. They didn't dive on trenches or bunkers. They dove on apartment blocks, grain silos, hospitals. In Oleksandr's bunker, the comms erupted in panicked screams. A feed from a city camera showed a residential street, peaceful one moment, then engulfed in a ball of fire the next. Another channel crackled to life. "Bus hit near the evacuation point. God, oh God, they're just civilians." Urina's face was a mask of cold fury, but her hands never faltered. She zoomed one of her surveillance drones, a silent, high-altitude observer, onto the burning bus. The image was sickening. 23 lives extinguished in an instant. "They're trying to make us panic," Alexander said, his voice dangerously calm. "They want our artillery to fire wildly, to reveal their positions. They want our men to break formation and run. Hold fast. Every man holds." He was speaking to his commanders, but also to himself. The images of burning homes, of slaughtered innocents, threatened to shatter his iron control. This was the cost of his trap. For it to work, the beast had to be lured deep inside. He had to let it feed. By 7:10 a.m., the drones subsided, their work of terror complete. They were replaced by a new sound, a deep, earth-shaking rumble that grew from a tremor into a roar. The armored columns were coming. Dmitri felt his tank lurch forward, part of a magnificent steel avalanche. He saw the columns to his left and right, moving in tight, perfect formation. They were invincible. The drone strikes would have shattered Ukrainian morale and crippled their command structure. This part, he thought, would be easy. "Fire at will on any structure over 2 stories." His battalion commander's voice crackled over the radio, a chillingly casual order. "Assume enemy observers." Dmitri didn't question it. He designated a small apartment building on the outskirts of a village. "Gleb, target." Target acquired. "Fire." The T-90 bucked as the 125-meter cannon roared. The building vanished in a cloud of dust and concrete. Dmitri felt a surge of power, a sense that he was an instrument of history. He did not think about the people who might have been inside. He couldn't afford to. Behind his tank, he saw the trucks, 150 of them, carrying the elite infantry who would secure the ground they took. They were laughing, weapons ready, expecting a broken enemy. The confidence was a disease, spreading through the Russian ranks. They advanced faster, their formations growing looser, more reckless. They saw empty roads, quiet fields. They saw weakness. Alexander saw his plan unfolding perfectly. "They're taking the bait," he whispered. He watched on the main screen as the lead tank of the central column, Dmitri's column, approached a shallow, insignificant-looking ridge. The entire bunker held its breath. "Now," Alexander said, Dmitri's tank, the beast, rolled onto the ridge. For a fraction of a second, everything was normal. Then the world fell away. It wasn't an explosion. It was a sickening collapse. The ground beneath the 46-ton machine simply vanished. Dmitri was slammed against his console as the tank plunged nose first into darkness. It was a 20-foot drop. The landing was a cataclysm of screeching metal and shattering bone. Before he could even process the fall, a blinding white light erupted from below. The tank had landed directly on a bed of hidden anti-tank mines. The explosion ripped through the hull, turning the crew compartment into an inferno. The concussion threw Dmitri against the turret ceiling, then spat him out of the commander's hatch like a cork from a bottle. He landed in a heap 30 feet away, his ears ringing, his uniform smoking. He pushed himself up just in time to see his tank's turret, a solid 15 tons of steel, spinning through the air before crashing back to earth in a fountain of fire. Gleb, Misha, Sergei. They were gone. It was just the beginning. All along the 3-mile front, the earth opened up. Tanks veered off roads that weren't roads at all, but thin crusts of earth covering deep pits. Some pits were filled with explosives. Others were lined with sharpened steel spikes, brutal, medieval things that sheared through tank tracks and impaled the machines. Panic erupted on the Russian radio net. "We're stuck! Sector Gamma, we've lost 2 tanks! What is this? What's happening? I've hit something. We're immobilized. Pull back! All units, pull back!" But retreat was impossible. The paths they had taken were the only safe routes, and they were now clogged with the burning wrecks of their comrades. The open fields to their flanks, which now seemed like the only way out, were deliberate illusions. They were the true kill zones. Infantrymen, desperate to escape the death traps, bailed out of their transport trucks. They jumped into what looked like shallow ditches or tall grass for cover. Their screams were cut short as they fell into narrower, deeper pits, man-traps filled with sharpened stakes pointing skyward. The medieval had been blended with the modern. In 6 minutes, 11 Russian tanks were destroyed or disabled without a single Ukrainian soldier firing a shot. The spearhead was broken, the formation shattered. The unstoppable offensive had ground to a bloody, confused halt. Dmitri lay in the mud, the smell of his own burning tank filling his nostrils. The confidence, the pride, the belief in a swift victory, it had all burned away with his crew. All he felt now was a cold, stark terror. He saw men running, shouting, dying. He saw machines, worth millions of dollars, sitting dead in the water. In the bunker, Alexander watched the chaos unfold. There was no triumph on his face, only a grim focus. The first part of his plan had worked. Now, as the enemy was at its most vulnerable, it was time to reveal the second layer. "Urena, target the infiltration teams. Let the mortars sing," he commanded. To his artillery commander he said, "Unmask the Bodanas. GPS coordinates are locked. Fire for effect." And to the commander of his armored reserve, "The oplots are cleared to advance. Begin the hunt." Across the battlefield the ground stirred to life again. But this time, it was not to swallow the Russians. It was to kill them. The world had become a symphony of explosions. From concealed positions along the ridge, the long barrels of Ukrainian Bodana howitzers rose, their muzzles flashing in the morning light. The shells didn't fall randomly. Guided by GPS coordinates fed to them by Urena's drones, they descended with terrifying precision. A cluster of Russian infantry trying to organize a defense vanished in a geyser of earth and shrapnel. A fuel truck exploded in a massive fireball that consumed 2 other vehicles. For Dmitri, still dazed and crawling through the mud, the world was a blur of smoke and fire. He had lost his helmet, his rifle, everything but the primal instinct to survive. He saw a group of soldiers from his support convoy, their faces masks of terror, trying to wave a piece of white cloth. Before they could take another step, a shell landed directly in their midst. There was nothing left. Then came a new sound, an angry, high-revving buzz that cut through the cacophony. From hidden staging areas they emerged, hundreds of Ukrainian motorcycle assault teams. They weren't sleek military machines, but modified dirt bikes, stripped down and armored with steel plates. A grenade launcher was mounted on one's handlebars, a machine gun on another's. Their riders were a mix of grizzled veterans and young daredevils, their faces set with grim determination. Taras, a man whose leathery face was a roadmap of past conflicts, led the charge. At 50, he should have been teaching his grandkids to fish, not hunting soldiers in an open field. But his country had called. He twisted the throttle, his bike leaping over a bomb crater. They were a pack of wolves descending on a scattered wounded flock. Their speed was their greatest weapon. They moved at over 70 miles per hour, weaving between burning tanks and shell holes, impossible to track, impossible to hit. They surged past the Russian front line, flanking the infantry who were fleeing on foot. Taras saw a group of about 10 soldiers hiding in an irrigation ditch. He swerved his bike, his gunner opening up with the machine gun, spraying suppressive fire. Another rider tossed a grenade that landed perfectly among them. The chase was relentless, merciless. The motorcycle detachments were not there to take ground. They were there to ensure no one was left to retake it. Meanwhile, Urena's focus was on the phantoms. The Spetsnaz infiltration teams, once the unseen threat, were now glowing hotspots on her thermal display. Their mission to strike from behind had become a death sentence. Cut off and isolated, they tried to regroup in abandoned barns or village houses. Target package Delta is in the old farmstead, coordinates locked, Urena reported calmly. "Send it," Alexander replied. Miles away, a mortar team received the coordinates. A tube coughed, sending a shell on a high arc. The roof of the farmstead imploded. Package Delta ceased to exist. One by one, the infiltration teams were tracked, targeted, and erased. The clever tactic designed to break Ukraine from within had been turned into a systematic execution. The final piece of the trap was the Ukrainian armor. Oplot tanks, their camouflaged hulls blending with the tree lines, rumbled forward. They were not charging into a fight, they were advancing on a route. They moved with a chilling deliberateness, their cannons leveled, picking off the remaining immobilized Russian tanks and trucks one by one. Dmitri found himself with a small group of survivors huddled behind the wreck of a supply truck. Their ammunition was spent, their radios were jammed, their officers were dead. They were boys, he realized, looking at their terrified, soot-stained faces. He was a boy, too. The glorious victory march had lasted less than an hour. Now they were trapped in a graveyard of their own making. He saw one of the Ukrainian tanks approaching, its massive form blotting out the smoke-filled sky. It was over. He felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. He had failed his country. He had failed his men. He closed his eyes, waiting for the end. The sun was higher now, a pale, indifferent eye in a sky streaked with black smoke. The battle, if it could still be called that, was over. The 90-minute storm had passed, leaving behind a chilling silence broken only by the crackle of fires and the groans of the wounded. The battlefield was a museum of destruction. For nearly 3.5 miles, the landscape was a twisted scar of craters, scorched earth, and the mangled skeletons of military hardware. The smell of cordite, diesel, and death hung heavy in the air. Out of the 120 tanks Russia had sent across the border with such confidence, 42 were now smoking, blackened husks. Another 23 sat disabled and abandoned, their hatches agape like silent screams. Over 80 of the 150 trucks that had carried the elite infantry were incinerated, many with their human cargo still inside. The human cost was staggering. In the span of time it takes to watch a movie, an entire Russian regiment's combat strength had been functionally erased. Andriy, a Ukrainian medic no older than the boy soldiers he was now tending to, moved through the wreckage. He felt no triumph, only a profound and weary sadness. He stepped around the body of a Russian soldier, his face frozen in a rictus of surprise, and knelt beside another. This one was alive. Barely. He was a boy, maybe 19, his face scorched by fire, his uniform in tatters. He was trying to push himself up, his eyes wide with a mixture of pain and terror. Andriy gently pushed him back down. "Spokojno," Andriy said softly, easy. The boy flinched, expecting a bullet. Instead, Andriy unclipped his own water flask. He unscrewed the cap and held it to the Russian soldier's cracked lips. The boy drank greedily, his eyes never leaving Andriy's, searching for the trick, the catch. There was none. It was just water, a simple act of humanity in a landscape of utter inhumanity. A photographer captured the moment, an image that would later spread across the globe, a single point of light in an ocean of darkness. In his bunker, Alexander received the final reports. Over 1,000 Russian casualties, 610 killed, 290 wounded, 150 captured. All 31 of the tracked infiltration squads neutralized. The cost to his own forces was miraculously light. He had traded dirt, steel spikes, and carefully placed explosives for the lives of his men, and he had won. A communications officer handed him a new intelligence intercept, fresh from Kiev. "Sir, the Kremlin is in chaos. 3 generals are under investigation. There are rumors one was arrested trying to flee Moscow." The report added that Putin's scheduled meeting with Donald Trump, intended to be a victory announcement, was now a source of deep humiliation. Alexander read the report, his face unreadable. He had shattered an army worth over $750 million with a plan that cost less than $20 million. Military analysts from NATO were already calling it a doctrinal earthquake. They would study this day for decades, writing papers on the synthesis of ancient traps and 21st-century technology. But Alexander wasn't thinking about doctrines or analysts. He was thinking of the bus full of evacuees. He was thinking of the apartments reduced to rubble. He was thinking of the young medic, Andriy, giving water to an enemy who, hours before, had been part of an invading force. He walked out of the bunker, blinking in the morning light. He looked out over the valley of death he had created. This was not a victory to be celebrated with parades and speeches. It was a grim, brutal necessity. It was proof that brute force, no matter how overwhelming, was a clumsy tool against foresight and resolve. It was proof that the will to defend one's home could turn simple farmland into an unbreakable fortress. The Great Russian Offensive of August 12, 2025, had failed. It had bled out in the fields of Zaporizhia before it had even reached the first true line of defense. A silence had fallen over the front, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a graveyard, a quiet reminder of a terrible truth. The lesson from that bloody morning is not simply about military tactics. It's a timeless truth that resonates far beyond the battlefield. True strength is not found in the volume of your thunder, but in the precision of your lightning. It is the wisdom to wait, the courage to prepare, and the ingenuity to turn your opponent's greatest strength into their fatal weakness. Brute force creates chaos, but strategy, patience, and a deep understanding of the terrain, both physical and human, create victory. Even in the darkest of times, a single act of humanity can echo louder than 1,000 cannons, reminding us what we are truly fighting for. What are your thoughts on this blend of ancient tactics and modern technology? Let me know in the comments below, and if you found this story powerful, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel for more history and analysis that matters.